conversation with Amanda Russo, one of the owners behind Blogger Babes Productions, and we are going to talk about the business side. And then if we get time before the break, the mentorship side. Otherwise, we'll talk about it after the break, depending on how the segue goes. So, Amanda, I'm curious. You said 90% of businesses are this year considering to use influencers of some sort. What are some examples that a business would want to use influencers for? I'm not looking from your company yet. We'll get to that. I'm talking about just high-level macro examples of why a brand, and you can use fictitious names or real names as examples of why would they want to work with influencers, just so people understand. And focus it on, if you don't mind, the industries that you represent the strongest. You know, you said the beauty, fashion, wellness.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest appeal is, number one, I mean, it's essentially they're outsourcing their marketing. They don't even have to have a marketing team necessarily to manage the campaign with influencers.
Nice.
I mean, our agency does that. Influencers can manage their own campaign very effectively. They're producing the content. I mean, it's really a very effective and quick way to go to market with your message. It can happen really, really rapidly, whether it's ephemeral content, like just shooting stories behind the scenes at an event or in an office space, or showing how a product is utilized. That content is instant, it goes right up, the brand gets tagged right away, they can reshare it. It's so time efficient and cost effective for the most part. So, I mean, I think that's the biggest appeal.
Nice.
And not, aside from that, it just goes back to, again, the whole micro influencer trend, really trying to
What is a micro influencer for those who don't know?
Yeah, and I think it's a misconception. I know, at least for me, when I say micro influencer to some brands, they're like, oh, okay, well, we want to work with the big influencers. It's like, well, okay, then you're not really understanding the term correctly, because micro influencer doesn't necessarily mean how many followers they have. Follower count nowadays is really pretty irrelevant. I mean, followers can be bought, followers can be, all over the world. They may not be relevant to your brand or your message or whatever. Micro influencers is more about a niche that person is focused on, and the fact that even if they have a low or, relatively low follower count, they're getting engagement. They're getting true, authentic engagement because their followers are local, or their followers are actual, real live human beings that can be influenced.
Nice.
And so, the micro trend is really about just kind of drilling down to that community level and, making sure that the audience is a targeted audience.
So I love this example because right before you jumped on, we were talking about some of the show guests I've had. And one of the guests that I'm very excited to, in the near future, get on is a guy named Rich Roll. Rich Roll is like, in anything to do with the whole plant-based, which for this conversation, and we're not doing a health and food podcast here or a radio show, but for this purpose, he's just preaching that you should consider adding more plant-based eating to your diet. That's all he's saying, on a small level, all the way to go all the way extreme and just do it fully. I'm not here to tell you either one. I'm just saying that's kind of high level what he's about. His reach in the plant-based food kind of world is better than anyone I know in terms of and then even more specific, he's probably the top podcast on that whole topic.
Right.
So would he be a micro influencer?
I would say he qualifies.
Okay.
Definitely. If he's that focused on, a very particular market segment and has a loyal, dedicated following in that segment, it really doesn't even matter how big that following is.
Okay.
I'd say that qualifies.
Awesome. Okay, good. I was just curious. That's a great example. You're talking more about the micro influencers and why a brand would want to hit them up because they can't touch the local audience bases. Is this applicable for so I live in California like you, and there's a clear difference in fashion for SoCal,
Sure.
Orange County versus you're from Chicago, right?
Yeah.
Or you were there for a long time.
Yeah.
Fashion wise, I feel like everyone in Chicago is dressed like from the Gap, and here everyone is dressed.
Well, and even between LA and OC, I mean, we're talking a 20-mile difference.
That's
and
true.
I think you'd see drastically different.
You do. Is there situations where a micro influencer can start a trend and it can go to mainstream? Because I mentioned before I had you sit here that I looked at the Final Four and they're now wearing hipster style basketball shorts. They're tighter, they're not long and baggy.
Sure.
3-5 years ago, it was all about the hip hop urban outlook. It's so crazy to see that on a national game,
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that the model can work in reverse just as easily. I mean, if you're a true influencer,
Yeah.
there's no limits to where that influence can spread and how far it can reach, you know? I
So
mean,
cool.
the fact that if it's an effective enough influencer, you would expect it to become a macro trend over time.
Nice.
So I think that's why it's important for brands to really focus on these micro influencers who know that market so well. They know those brands that are operating in that market so well. They know what their audience wants. They know what the consumers want.
Yeah.
And so if you're a brand, I mean, a business, that's saving you hours of market research, hours of, you know, working with your internal marketing team to, you know, read through, you know, local reports and try to understand when the information is already there. The influencer already has it. It's just a matter of tapping into that and really capitalizing on it as a business.
I love it. My last question before we head into a break is like, is there a live example, like a client that you're allowed to talk about for us, just to understand like the details of how why would a brand want to work with someone who has a reach to like a more micro local reach versus, hey, instead of just going all national?
Yeah, no, definitely. Excuse me. So Coach is a well-known brand.
Wow.
And they, you know, they manage individual stores, obviously, throughout the country. And there's a store here in California in South Coast Plaza.
That's true.
That reached out to us. The store manager reached out to us and said, hey, Coach is expanding its product line. It is trying to revitalize its brand and make it more relevant in today's market. And so we really want to work with some, you know, local influencers in the various communities that, you know, we're sort of testing this new product line out in. And we want them to bring in their followers who normally would not be Coach customers. You know, we want to test our products on the market that we want to reach. Mm-hmm. And the way they access that market is through the influencers that know that market so well. So they reached out to us. They'd love to set up an event, have our influencers invite their followers who would normally, again, not be Coach customers on a regular basis. And get them into the store, introduce them to the new product line, get their feedback. You know, obviously get their promotions, you know, run some promos to a wider audience. And so, you know, that's one example of a brand that has learned and is learning to scale down their marketing and tap into those micro influencer communities. Wow. And I think it's just going to continue. I mean, it already is continuing to expand and grow into, you know, different industries. But again, going back to fashion and beauty, where, you know, it's very, very difficult nowadays to pivot, and it's very difficult to, you know, reposition your brand when there are so many other competitors out there.
Yeah.
This is one way to really set yourself apart.
I love it. Wow. Well, congrats, by the way. That's a great name. It's not just some name, it's Coach. Wow. Right. We're going to take a quick break, and then when we get back, we are going to